is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 137 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Iona Wayland all about how to write mental health and trauma experiences. And of course, given the topic, I do want to make it very clear that if you do have trigger warnings, this episode may not be for you. This is a very heavy topic. It's very difficult. We do talk about hard topics. And so I just want to make it clear that if you do have trigger warnings, I would maybe consider skipping this episode. So last week's question was, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from your journey so far? Claire Louise said, love this podcast. The biggest lesson from my writing journey so far is that it's all right for your project to take time. It's good even because the time means that I'm crafting something to the best of my ability. Publishing stories hype up the idea of overnight success. Oh my God, they really do. But actually, books take months, years, even of hard graft. It's okay that there's been a few years since my last book because the next one is all the better for it. Shane Miller said, fantastic episode. Biggest lesson from the last year is that working full-time in my author business is possible and I will achieve that goal no matter what. Yeah, you will. Okay, so in line with the topic for this week, my question of the week is, how are you looking after yourself? Okay, the book recommendation of the week this week is the Bestseller Code by Matthew Jockers and Jodie Archer. I am reading this and finding it very fascinating. It's basically a academic pair who created a bit of software, a bit of kit that can basically predict whether or not a book is going to be a bestseller. And so they've drawn out patterns to establish like what the commonalities are between books that end up on the New York Times bestseller lists, etc. And I'm not sure I'm learning anything particularly new, but it is deeply fascinating and deeply insightful. And for a pair of academics, it's actually very readable as well. I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, they did a good job. So if you are interested in a bit of geekery with statistics for the publishing world, then I would highly recommend this book. So in personal update, I don't even know where I was last week. So last week, I think as I was recording this, it was possibly the launch day of Trey, the book that nearly killed me. I finally released and got it out. And so yay, the trilogy is now done. I do have kind of a bonus novella Easter egg type thing for series readers, which will come out at the end of this month. In fact, just before I head off to New York. But now I am desperately trying to finish the next nonfiction book, which is called The Anatomy of a Bestseller. I am really excited to share this book with you. I'm super close to the end. I kind of thought I would finish it last week, but then various like exhaustion things post-COVID still plaguing me. I'm actually quite a lot better this week, which is good. But then we had a bloody bank holiday. So I lost a day this week and it was a writing day as well. Mondays are usually my writing days. So I don't think I will finish it this week. I think it will, maybe by middle of next week, I will be done. I'm not sure, hopefully. I am so close. I am like, what happens with me when I get close to the end of the first draft? I tend to start freaking out. I tend to go into a lot of imposter syndrome and doubt and what if the book's no good? What if it's rubbish? What if I've said something wrong? What if people don't find it useful? On and on and on and on I go, literally having a sort of meltdown over getting, and it's just because I know that after a quick edit, I'm going to have to send it off. And so I'm just freaking out about that. So I don't know if that's reassuring to anybody who's a newer writer, but that doesn't seem to go away for me. And I don't even know how many books I'm in now, but yeah, it just doesn't seem to go away. Maybe I should tell you guys like what this book is about. So essentially, Anatomy of a Bestseller is all about looking at the market, looking at the books in your genre and being able to deconstruct what they're doing well so that you can do that only better. I think it's going to, not I think, I know it is looking at everything from sentence level to kind of character and scene level up to like story level. And then it also has some sections on looking at the market as well, and kind of really knowing how to deconstruct the market and what's going on in the market. And so like it is not going to tell you how to write a lightning bolt, 50 Shades of Grey, because nobody can do that. And if they try and tell you they can, they're fucking lying. But it will show you how to know what it is that these best-selling authors are doing and why it's so good. And yeah, so I am excited. I really hope, like, this is a little different than anything that I've done before, which is also why I'm nervous. But I am running these masterclasses with the Patreon group at a certain level where we read books and we deconstruct, and I kind of show everybody what the book has done well, what the book hasn't done so well, what tools and tactics they can take out of the books in order to put into their own works, in their own voices. And this is sort of where it's come from, along with a little bit of stuff that was already kind of in my head and things that I was talking about. So yeah, I'm like really excited, and I finally feel like I can start talking about it because I'm really close to the end of the book. So yeah, it's not going to be a huge book. It's not going to be as big as prose or side characters. I reckon it's more going to be along the size of villains and heroes, because the thing is, it's actually a really practical, like, a lot of the stuff in there is about being really, really practical. So yeah, I am excited, and I'm starting to get nervous, but yeah, I hope that one is out kind of before summer. I don't know, like, I'm not gonna fuck about. Like, I'm just gonna publish it. So yeah, once I get it done, I'm gonna send it to some critique partners, and then once they give me their feedback, I will do that and then get it to the editor, and I'm just gonna fucking publish it. We're just gonna go for it, baby. So yeah. And then, so as soon as that is done, I am going to finally finish The Scent of Death, and I would like that done really before the summer kind of really properly hits, because I'm away for like 3 weeks this summer, so I really need to not have a book hanging over me. And yeah, I'm kind of trying to pin down what the next series is that I'm going to work on, because I have 2 series that I've loosely got in my head, and I can't quite decide which one I should be working on. And maybe I'll just combine the 2. I don't know, but that's probably a recipe for a disaster, to be honest. So yeah, I'm trying to make that decision. And I'm also working on an idea for a course that I'm super excited about. I was working on the Enemies to Lovers course, and I am going to finish that one. But I've had a different, better idea that I'm really excited for. So I have been just like outlining a bit more, because it's going to be bigger, meatier. And yeah, so I have also been working on that, and I will tell you guys more about that when I can. Okay. The Rebel of the Week this week is Lena Johnson. Lena says, in high school English, we were studying the hero's journey. As one of our assignments, the teacher had us write a story using all of its beats in 2 pages. 2 pages for the hero's journey? That is ridiculous. You can't write a proper hero's journey in 2 goddamn pages. I'm a writer, and I've always been a writer, so challenge fucking accepted. I wrote an epic tale of humans and elves hitting every single beat, and that fucker was 11 pages long. When the teacher was handing back the assignments, I could see my chonker in the middle of all the teeny, itty-bitty 2-page stories. She plops my story on my desk, and the only comment on the entire document was a big fat A on the top. Yeah, that's right. I aced the assignment. 2 pages, my ass. Oh my goodness me, I absolutely love that story. I love that you got an A anyway. Like, I wasn't sure where this story was going, and if like the teacher might have failed you and just to be an asshole because you didn't adhere to like the rules. But I loved this story, and I love that I loved it. I loved all of the story. Thank you so much for sending this in. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story. Like, literally, guys, we are always in desperate need. We cycle around having sort of 4 or 5 in the bank at any one time. So especially for this summer when I go away, I'm going to need these stories because I'm going to record like a few episodes so that the 3 weeks that I'm away is covered. So yeah, please do send in your stories. It can be any kind of rebellion. It can be a big one, a small one, something in between. It can be about a pet. It can be about a relative. I don't care. I just want the stories. Please send your story to Becca on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. 2 new patrons this week. Welcome and a big thank you to Valerie Ishan and CJ Dainton. Thank you so much for joining me, you guys. There is stacks of stuff going on, from being in the Slack group to the quarterly challenge to the monthly Poison and Prose live Q&A sessions that we do and writing together. So yeah, maybe I should like put a post together about all the stuff going on. Actually, that's probably a good idea. So yes, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the support. It means everything to me. It helps to pay for the cost of the show. It helps to pay for my time. So yeah, I am deeply grateful. If you would like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus content and goodies, you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Okay, that is it from me. We're going to get on with the episode now, and just to mention once again, if anybody does have any triggers, this is probably not the episode for you. So yes, I just wanted to reiterate that as we are going to crack on with the episode now. Last quick point, I recorded this episode I think whilst I still had COVID, or it was literally just after having COVID. I have tried to eradicate out most of the coughing fits from the episode, but I am clearing my throat a few times still, which I can't get out because it's during the conversation. So apologies for that, but I was poorly. I hope you still enjoy the episode anyway. Hello, and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I am joined by Iona Wayland. Iona is an author, book lover, and tea enthusiast. She considers herself a child of the forest and is a devoted animal mum and mental health professional who specializes in trauma. She depicts aspects of the human experience, often in fantastical ways. Common themes of her work include grief, surviving trauma, and finding purpose and strength. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. You know, it's funny, like I always say, I either want stories to like shock and like make my heart pound because I'm like shipping everything, or I want them to be about grief so that I can cry. Like, that's it. Like, that's my 2 types of stories I want to read. Like, make me cry. I love grief stories. I love stories. One of my favorite young adults books is The Sun is Not The Sun Is Everywhere. I'll give you, The Sky Is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson, which is about a teen grieving her sister. And
wow,
it's just
so powerful. I have not read that one, but I'm going to definitely add it to my list.
It's beautiful, beautifully written as well. But anyway, fuck that. Tell everyone about you. Fuck Jandy Nelson. This is about you today.
Well, I love hearing recommendations. But yes, I specialize in trauma and children, but obviously I'm focusing more on trauma today. And then I'm an author. So by day, I'm a therapist, and by night, so to speak, I'm an author of a dark fantasy, but I don't know if this is even a genre, but I'm making it a genre where it's like trauma-informed dark fantasy. And I'm also like really into like my animals, and I'm a new mom. And so that's been like a fun change for me. So that's just a little bit about me.
And you're also a sensitivity reader, is that right?
I always forget to say that. Yes, I am a sensitivity reader. And I have information about that on my author website. But yeah, I read sensitivity read for mental health, as well as different like racial things. And then like if anyone wants to find out about that, they can go down to what my interests are and what I read for at the bottom of my webpage.
Did you, and this is not a question that I have prepared you for, but did you do any training? Like, was there just an amount of research that you've done? Like, is it through personal experience? Like, how does one become a sensitivity reader? Like, I have no idea about that.
So it's really funny because it's a very vast reasoning behind people becoming sensitivity readers. Like in the broad spectrum, it can be anything from like for instance, someone might be like, I have depression and I like to sensitivity read for depression. So it's like an interest, all the way to like, I'm a licensed mental health professional and I like have the background in this, which is like my perspective. But how I got into it was I was beta reading for The Savior Sister for Jenna Moreci. And I really liked it. And I was pointing out all these mental health things that I was finding in it that were accurate. And I really liked it a lot. And then I was also pointing out certain other things where I'm like, oh, this looks like, or like, this is a type of response that's more like usually happens here. Or this one took me out of the story, or this one put me in the story, just little things like that. And Jenna was like, like you could definitely be a sensitivity reader. And I a little bit knew what that was, but I didn't really know what that was at the time. And then when I looked into it, I was like, well, hell, I do this all the time when I'm watching TV and reading books anyway. So if I can kind of make a side hustle out of it, I'll do that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. One of my biggest bugbears is when people give their villains mental health disorders and then blame the villainous actions on the mental health disorder. Like it is literally, I will just, that's it, DNF immediate. Like,
same.
It drives me insane. Okay, so your profession is trauma and you're a mental health professional. So I wanted to talk about trauma in books and in fiction and in, I suppose, nonfiction as well. I can't leave nonfiction people out. But I wondered how writers should even approach like trauma in terms of writing it, in terms of a character's experience. Are there things that they should be aware of? Like, how should they research that? Like, what is a good, like, thoughtful approach to take when approaching trauma?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something that like a lot of people think about. And even like with my background, I thought about that before writing too, is like, I just look at motivation and intention. And even though like that's not a pass, because if something's harmful or misrepresented, it kind of doesn't matter what the intention is because it's like causing harm. But ultimately, like what's the motivation and intention behind the writing? And then you can get into like researching it. And so when I think about research, I think about looking at, just because of like me being a clinical person, a clinical professional, I personally have to look at criteria for diagnoses or
the DSM.
So the DSM-5 in the US, ICD-10 in the UK. And so those are the things that I look at symptomology wise, but I also really need like to include the human element. Like I think it's really important to include human elements in it. So like looking at testimonials and talking with people who have trauma, if they're open to it and if you do it in like an intentional way. And then also, my train of thought is totally going away. Oh, also, I think that it's important to know what trauma even is. So it's really anything that causes your brain to go into fight, flight, freeze mode, anything at all. It doesn't mean that that'll become a trauma memory or become PTSD or something else diagnosable in the trauma scape. But it definitely, like, I think a lot of people don't know that trauma is really anything that just makes your brain and body go, and then.
So would a fear give you trauma?
So fear as in like a phobia?
Yeah.
Yes, that can be traumatic. So there can be a phobia of something. So I have a thalassophobia, which means a fear of deep water, especially stuff that you can't see. That freaks me out. So I can have that phobia. But if someone were to push me into a muddy pond, that could be traumatic for me because my body is going to react in a fight, flight, or freeze way. And that doesn't mean that it'll turn into like a diagnosable thing later. But in that particular moment, that would be traumatic. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so I'm with you on the research. So my background is in psychology. I have a degree in psychology. I have a master's in cognitive neuropsychology.
I love it.
Yeah, and so it's funny because I was going to do a PhD. I got a scholarship to do a PhD on distributed cognition, but in the end, I'd OD'd on education, and I needed a break. And then, I was done. And I wanted money. And so I didn't end up going through with it. But like, even still, I forget stuff changes, like criteria changes, symptoms, grow, expand, change, shrink, treatments change. And, so you definitely have to keep your knowledge up to date, especially if you're going to represent it in fiction. And this might be a naive question, but so we've talked about sort of the triggers for trauma and what trauma is. What is the expression of trauma?
Okay, so this has been changing recently. So I'm glad you brought up this question. So originally, it was seen as the sympathetic nervous response, which means that the amygdala was, it's just like a part of the brain. It gets like kind of zappy and it gets alive. And that was called the sympathetic nervous response. And then kind of a colloquial term was fight or flight. Then they noticed that people were doing more than just fight or flight. So fight would be using physical force or cutting words. Flight is what it sounds like, where you like run away or try and avoid something. They added freeze because they noticed something called dissociation, which means that someone disconnects from their body or a personality state or their surroundings. Like it helps them cope with it not feeling very real. So that's dissociation. And then there's also literal freezing, like the person cannot move certain parts of their body or cannot speak or something like that. So they added freeze in there. Now there's a big debate about adding something called fawn and fidget. So fawning, and I have mixed feelings about this, but because I see it more as a survival technique than something that happens like in a traumatic experience. I see it as more as like someone surviving, but maybe they'll find out that it does get added to the sympathetic nervous response. But fawning is like, let's say you have like this boss that really puts you over the edge and they're kind of scary to talk to. If they're like, hey, I need to see you in my office, and you start having like the flutters and you're really freaked out, you might be like, oh my God, I love your outfit today. Your hair looks so great. I'm always open to your feedback. You're such a good leader. All of those things are like flattery to kind of diffuse the situation ahead of time, which is still like a valid survival technique. I just mean like, I don't know if it's going to be included with trauma responses as in like triggered responses. Yeah. And then the last one's fidget. That is exactly what it sounds like, where someone will be fidgeting with parts of their body, an item, or even like passing gas or burping or having the hiccups. And that one I do think, because it's so involuntary, that one I do think will end up being added. But that's not to say that someone who fidgets all of the time is like constantly traumatized. It's more like only in certain traumatic situations that person does that.
And I suppose that is also like an anxiety. Like I'm guessing anxiety is connected to trauma, or like the potential for trauma. It's almost like a step before, right? Like, yeah.
At least in the US, like ASD, not autism spectrum disorder, but
antisocial.
No, not that one either. That's right. No, there's two. So there's someone has acute stress disorder.
Okay.
If it happens, if they just have PTSD type symptoms within like 3 months, but if it's either 3 or 6 months. I should know this, but whatever. And then it'll become PTSD later if the symptoms are longer than that. But all of that's just to say that they are considered, ASD and PTSD are considered anxiety disorders.
Okay.
So that's, you're on top of things.
Yeah, so, no, I find it, this is geek for me. I love this stuff because this is
I'm
like
so
my inner
glad
learner.
because I am like info dumping at you.
No, you're not. No, I love it. I love it. This is like so like throwback to university as well, and all the stuff that because I was looking at clinical psychology. That's the
so
world
cool.
I would have been in if I hadn't have done what I did. I haven't even asked my questions. Like just completely ignored my questions. Okay, what are some of the mistakes that you see writers making when they either try to write about mental health or they try to include trauma? Like what are some of the real faux pas or no-nos or mistakes that you see?
So you brought up one. Also, I'm going to try and not get on a soapbox with this, but you brought up one that really peeves me, where someone has a villainous character or an antagonist, and they will make that person do certain behaviors or certain things that are an obstacle for the main character, but it like is blamed on, or the reasoning behind it, the logic behind it is not because it's how that character is, it's because they're using a diagnosis of some sort as a personality trait. But that's not true. So that always immediately takes me out of the story. And it also makes me like a little upset because there's so much stigma behind mental health in general that if we keep doing this, and words are so powerful, if we just keep continuing repeating the same mistakes that we've made for years and years, it's just going to continue that stigmatization for longer. So that's definitely one.
I mean, I am all there. I have a chapter in one of my books about mental health, basically myth busting, and I start with a soapbox rant about why you should absolutely not use mental health in connection like with villains, and then here's the truth about actual mental health. And I had one of my best friends from uni is a clinical psychologist, so I was like, honey, you need to go make sure that I'm up to date on all of this. I've done everything and I had her like proper check it and like make sure everything was accurate. And so I mean, it may be, it was like, it's old now, it's like 5 years old, so there's bound to be something wrong in there now, but because it pisses me off so much. But is there anything else you see, any other like mistakes or faux pas? Or
so definitely I call it like throwing the kitchen sink. I don't know where that term comes from, honestly, but it just means like you include all of the symptoms, like everything and all of the symptoms at something, which I love because someone did their research, but I don't love because it's not realistic. So I think
they do it all at the same time, right?
Yes.
So they have like, all of the things all at the same time.
Yeah, all the things all at the same time. And it definitely takes you out of it, because the whole point of what causes trauma reactions to like happen is because it is a skill that they used during trauma times when they weren't safe, that did keep them safe. And now they're in a safer environment, or that particular trauma is no longer occurring. So that doesn't fit with their daily life now, but it should make sense as to how they dealt with issues in the past. So like if someone goes into freeze mode, if they have a caretaker that is berating them and they freeze, and if they don't talk, then they know that the berating will end early, or the verbal abuse will end early. Then that helped them then. But when it's time for them to give a presentation and they're triggered because someone in authority is watching them give a presentation, for example, I would love to see that character. I mean, I don't actually love to see this. This is hard, but it would make more sense if that character would suddenly become silent or not be able to speak smoothly, because that makes sense with the environment they grew up in. So I really don't like when someone throws a whole bunch of symptoms as if it's a checklist and just kind of like throws it at them. It's like that, they have, let's say, PTSD because of these symptoms, right? And it's like kind of, but not really.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So like, I'm trying to think about how, it's like a wound, so like a hero's wound. The whole point of doing a wound well is to have the cause and the source like either event or reoccurring events that happened to create the wound, which then impacts and affects the behavior in the present time, right? So it's exactly the same with the mental health disorder or the trauma or the, So what is the cause? What was the cause? And therefore, what was the reaction? What was the traumatic reaction or behavior? And therefore, how does that affect the character in the real time? Yeah, I love that. Sorry, I'm like processing out loud, but like, yeah.
I love it. I'm also an out loud processor, so I'm very glad that this is happening.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about trigger warnings and content warnings. I almost forgot what the C was then. Trigger warnings and content warnings. Like, what is the difference? When should you use them? And I think the other question that people have is where are you supposed to put them? And how much detail do you put in them?
So there's a whole range of thought process behind it. So starting first, the difference between content warnings and trigger warnings is content warnings are considered something that any person might find difficult to look at. So like gore or like intense fear of something, things like that. So you would put that in as content warnings. Trigger warnings are when you kind of are more detailed. You don't have to be super detailed, but like you're like, for instance, there might be SA discussed in this book, or there might be anything that would be specific sexual abuse, but I don't know if that's like allowed on any platform. Okay, cool.
I have no idea. I just didn't know what it was.
Okay, sorry. I do not mean to use acronyms when like.
Well, what I will do at the beginning of this show is I will tell everyone that we're going to talk about difficult topics.
Yes, perfect.
So yes, okay, that's what I will do.
And that's a content warning.
There we go. That's perfect. Hey, look at me implementing straight away.
You were implementing it immediately. So if you talk about something like sexual assault, suicide, anything, cancer, like very specific pain points that are very harmful for someone who has been a survivor of it to read, that would be more considered trigger warnings. I personally feel like if you have content warnings that kind of cover it and you put it in the beginning of the book, that way, anytime your reader opens the book, they'll have a reminder because they have to flip through the front pages that this is the kind of content in there. That's really helpful. Especially for mental health, you want to make sure you're taking care of your readers. And also, even if you don't want to think about it in a humanistic way and you want to think about it only in a business sense, it will cause you to not have as many DNFs, and it will help you with ratings because people won't be shocked by what's going on within the book. And you're also not like exploiting a group of survivors to put content out there that might be harmful for readers or harmful for survivors to read at that particular time. And I also think that some people go so far as to include trigger warnings before each chapter. Sometimes people in the very beginning of the book will be like, hey, this particular trigger thing is talked about from this page to this page. You can be as detailed as you want in it. I personally think, this is just total personal opinion, as long as you have that warning, whether it's content or trigger or both, in the beginning of your book, your readers are going to pass by that content warning every single time. So those are just my thoughts on it.
Okay. I'm having thoughts about some of the stuff that's in my own books that I probably should have put content warnings on for.
It's always hard. That is something else. It's always like hard, at least for me, to like, I'm a curious person and I know you're a curious person. But then when you learn about something where you're like, shit, I should have done this differently. That's always hard. But I also like that you're like modeling that, because no one like is born knowing this stuff.
Yeah.
And also like, I think the better skill for someone to have is not to know everything, but to be curious about something and then be willing to learn / unlearn something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly like my whole ethos. I am a learner at heart. I will always be I'm a student of life, a student of the world. And yeah, I totally, like, I always confess my mistakes. I always am like, I learned this. But like the thing that I really like doing is then sharing the things that I learn, right? So that other people can learn about them too.
I love that. That's such a wealth for other people to have that experience with you.
Yeah. And I think I might have to, and it's all right because it's not been released. The book is not released yet, but the final book in my trilogy, she definitely deals with grief and has some addictive, like, it's magic though. It's not, so I don't, it's a
that
funny
content-y.
Yeah, it sounds, yeah, definitely. Like, but there are addictive behaviors. So I think maybe I will go back and slip in some content warnings.
Yeah, might as well. It doesn't hurt.
Exactly.
But also it's helpful too, like if you have beta readers telling you things. So for instance, I originally had content and trigger warnings in the beginning of my book. But I specifically had readers who had similar circumstances, like the particular kind of loss I depict, the particular kind of abuse that I depict, and the particular kind of like depression / grief that I depict. There were lots of beta readers that I intentionally asked them if they were comfortable reading for me, and then also got their feedback and took it very seriously. And they were like, the trigger stuff isn't necessary. Like it wasn't handled in a way that like shocked me or made me like rattly. So I don't think it's needed. So I just took that feedback too. So you can always like pass it by, because it's possible that like your beta readers won't find it upsetting in that way, or won't find it triggering in that way.
Yeah, I've had some feedback to say it was reassuring.
I love that.
Yeah. So, and I won't go into any more detail because
no spoilers.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say an author would like to have a character who has experienced trauma. What are some of the ways to portray that realistically in fiction?
So definitely, like we were talking about, with making the symptomology make sense is a good way to go. Like just to keep that in mind, like why is this, like I get that this is a symptom of trauma, totally makes sense. But like, why is it this particular symptom? Like how did that used to help them? And why is it getting in the way of their life now? So that's one thing to be really careful about. I also think it's important to remember that people don't have to have like diagnosable levels of things to show trauma symptoms. So like in the DSM-5 and the ICD-10, these diagnostic manuals are there just like for insurance purposes. They're not like depicting all of the human experience. So looking at something called sub-threshold, which means that the person is showing trauma symptoms, but it's not meeting the threshold of something that's like deeply affecting their everyday life, but it is something that pops up from time to time or under certain circumstances. So having that in mind is really good. I also think,
do you have an example? No, I'm more trying to dig deeper. Do you have an example of what that sub-threshold, what was the phrasing that you said, like that they have, was it trauma reactions?
Trauma reactions.
Yeah. What is some of that? What would that look like?
So this is like there's a whole scale of how it could look, because people are so diverse in their reactions and how their brains process things. But like a couple different examples might be, let's say someone was in a car accident and they're okay, but they might at certain stop lights or on that particular road might be a little jumpier or hyper vigilant than they would have been other times. So it's not to the point where they're like not able to leave their home or they're not able to use a car, but it is causing them stress in that particular area. That doesn't have to be that hard. Or you could go the total other direction and be like, this person rarely has a trauma reaction, but when they do, it's intense. So it's like, this person rarely has this trauma reaction, but every once in a while they'll get a horrible, horrible flashback nightmare combo, something like that, where it makes one night of sleep for them a month or a year or something cause them some distress, but it's not to the point where like they can't function at work or something like that, or it's affecting their relationships.
This is so interesting. This is so interesting. Like I want to go back and read like all the literary journals on like,
it's
all
fascinating. And it just makes me think brains are so cool because their primary function is to protect you. So I like that when people portray it realistically, it really does show through. Even the really, really difficult symptoms are only there to protect you because it used to work.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever thought about it like that, but I love how much that makes sense and how you can easily make that make sense in fiction. And it would also bring a real sense of like gestaltism, like full circle, like the whole is more than the sum of the parts in terms of like meaning and I love this so much. Okay.
I'm so glad because I could talk about this all day.
Yeah.
I actually literally do talk about it all day with people I work with.
Yeah. Okay. So are you in research or more therapy?
More therapy. I like reading research articles once someone else did the research. So I'm that person.
Yeah.
I'm an implementing person.
I love it. Okay, so I've got some questions from patrons. So Shane says, how has your work as a mental health professional influenced the themes in your fiction? And where did the inspiration for Ashes come from?
Oh, that's a good question. We're gonna get like deep. So a lot of mental health professionals are there because are in the field that they're in because they've been through certain things that they wish that they had someone like their grown self when they were little. And so that's something that I thought of in Ashes, where I'm like, I want this book to reach people that need it most. So I want to create something that has themes that touched on maybe things that I've been through before or people really close to me have been through before. And when someone reads it, they can see parts of themselves in that, but also know that there's like hope too. So that's another theme is like there's survival after an event, whatever that event or events, because it can be over time and multiple traumas because it's hard being a human. So I think that when there's a book out there, I just wish that I had maybe when I was a new adult or a teen, even though this is totally an adult book. Like I don't want it to get twisted here, but like it's just something that speaks to I think a lot of people's experiences. So I wanted the theme to be like, this is a book that's an allegory of PTSD, and that's what I want to put into the world. But at the same time, that people are very resilient and brains are made to heal. That's like their design is to heal and protect, and just showing that facing those fears can cause that kind of healing to happen.
Do we have plasticity all the way through our lives? Like, or because I thought the brain plasticity reduces.
It slows very down. Yeah, like way down. I want to say at the latest age 10. Yeah, but I also could be wrong and I need to look at that. And that's a really good question. And now I'm very curious. And so now I'm going to find articles and send them to you later today. But we always have the capacity, though, to have plasticity to make those new neural connections and stuff like that. It's just that when you're a kid, it happens like really, really fast and very easily. Whereas if someone has a particular neural pathway that's really, this isn't exactly what it looks like, but if you just think of like the groove or the rut is very deep, and so jumping out of that rut and using a different path is harder. That's what going through mental health help or not, therapy isn't for everybody. So if someone isn't interested, then that's totally fine. But like even just doing self-care type things can help get that person out of that particular rut.
is there, this is such a random question, but like, is there such a thing as slow trauma? So like the slow repeated thing, I'm thinking of like the pandemic and the isolation for children. Like, is there a form of like slow trauma that can then create trauma responses at a later date?
Actually, if you want to get like real scientific, they can tell, for instance, which Irish ancestors have had ancestors that survived the potato famine because it has imprinted on their genetic code that those people went through that trauma.
Shut nuts. The fuck up. Are you kidding me?
No. So like things like that. So they can find on a genetic level that's why they talk about generational trauma. So like survivors of slavery and human trafficking. We've got different, I'm trying to think of the worst horrible things that happen in our world, like anything indigenous, genocide, like the indigenous genocides, Holocaust, like all of that can deeply, deeply affect someone and their future generations. And that's why there's kind of a mantra in trauma therapy specifically of like, it's going to end with me, because you can do things that can help your brain not feel sick and heavy with ancestral stuff that might pop up.
Can we just talk about this all night long? Because
I would love to.
Oh my God. Like, I literally need you to send me scientific articles on generational trauma. Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely will.
I am fascinated by generational trauma. I don't like, I need to understand the genetics and like the imprinting. Like, I want the data on that. I will also talk to you about this off air. Okay, so there was like another question that came. I don't know whether it's gone. Okay, never mind.
So glad because if any like listeners that I'm not going to send a million articles to today want to look it up, it's still considered a soft science just because it's not always replicatable. It's like not 100% replicatable, but it's called epigenetics. So if anyone wants to look into epigenetics, then that is definitely something that, like, if you really want to go down a rabbit hole when you're supposed to be sleeping, that's one to do.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff, like that is an input wormhole for sure. Okay, so I've got a question from Matt, and who's also a patron. And Matt says, how do you write for that specific other if the lived experience isn't your own? So Matt says, I support people with mental health challenges, which has inspired my writing, but I'm not sure what right I have to do anything with it after I've got the words out of me.
I really like this person's like self-check radar. It sounds like they really are questioning their intention, which would be the first step, is to like, what's your intention? It sounds like for this person that they really want to have like a voice for loved ones that are going through whatever it is they're going through. So just like knowing that you're going in with the intention of like love and respect and like survivorship mentality, I think that is really powerful to put that out into the world, especially if someone does their research and goes through the beta reader process and all that stuff, just to make sure that there aren't any little subconscious things that we all absorb from our society and the stigmas that society has for mental health. And I also think that by this person asking that question, that means that they're already doing the work.
I agree. Knowing this person, they are literally the nicest human ever.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah. This person has a range of like kids stories that are just exquisite. Aww. They're really inclusive. And they're like some of them are written in and I'm gonna mispronounce it and I'm sorry, is it Maori? I can't roll my R.
Like Hawaiian native,
New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I
Yeah.
completely missed an entire island. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Well, also I probably like butchered pronouncing it anyway. But yes, okay, right. Some questions from another patron. Lynn says, how do you look after yourself when you are writing difficult scenes?
Okay, that's a really good question too, because some authors are own voices, and in some respects for Ashes, its own voices, like racially, ethnically, and somewhat trauma-wise. So I just make sure that I am feeling okay that day, that particular time that I'm writing it, doing self-care stuff before and after writing, and then also knowing that if it's cutting too deep, like if it's like ruining or bringing up too much stuff, like if any author when they're writing something it's bringing up too much stuff, they don't have to force themselves to do it. We actually call that like white knuckling, because you're like gripping onto something, you're just forcing yourself through something. It's just like you're so valuable as like a human being, and of course you want to create this work, and at some point maybe it's something that you want to face, but I don't want any human being to feel like an obligation to regurgitating or picking at a wound, so to speak, just to get an art piece out there. I mean, that could be really powerful in the long run, but the person really has to make sure that they're doing it safely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How do you tell one person's experience of trauma or mental health without suggesting that that is how everyone experiences it?
Oh, okay. So I think that on the one hand, you would think that most people know that one depiction isn't like a monolith. It's not like the spokes main character for everyone with that particular thing. But if you wanted to level up your writing game, you could have other characters with similar issues, like maybe a similar diagnosis or diagnoses that depicts it differently. And they might not be the main character, but you can see where the main character's struggle differentiates from someone else's struggle. So, like, if you want to depict depression, because that is unfortunately very common and it can get really intense, there might be one person that sleeps a lot and another character that doesn't like doing photography like they used to. And a couple months out of the year, they don't get into photography anymore. And those are two different ways that depression might express itself. And you're showing, not telling, basically, those two different aspects of depression for that particular example.
If you could tell writers to do one thing to improve the representation, to improve their writing, like about trauma or mental health, what would you tell them?
I would say include people along the way. As long as the person's consenting to it and they're in the mental space to talk with you about it, because we don't know how much we've like internalized, honestly. Like there have been people that have had the experience of like anxiety, for example, who write stereotypical anxiety things that are like could easily be debunked just because that's something that they had heard or thought was true, for example. So it's just like just including more from that particular population, because there's going to be someone that reads your work that has a similar experience, like traumatic experience or similar symptomology as what you're depicting. And then also making sure to just be open and curious about different things and willing to unlearn some stuff. Because it always feels weird when you're like, that's not what I thought. That's weird. And your brain kind of has to like reorganize, so to speak, and upload a new mental file. But I think that's really important, just to make sure that you're open as a person and that you're also having more eyes on your work, because it's not, you can only self-check so much. And at some point, it's kind of like it takes a village to raise a kid. It also takes a village to raise a book baby.
Can you recommend any books or resources or websites or charities or like places that authors can go to start their research and to learn more about trauma and mental health in order to kind of represent it more accurately?
Yeah, so there's Dr. Vanderkalk had The Body Keeps the Score that just like blew up the whole trauma conceptualization. That I think is like layman, it is written enough in layman's terms that anyone could pick it up and read some of it. Some of it is like kind of intense, and so you might have to do some of your own research, but that's a really good one. Looking at the online, like some online resources are NIM and NAMI. So NIM is the National Institute for Mental Health, and NAMI is the National Alliance for, oh, no, I should know this. I'm looking it up. I'm cheating. I know this. Just pretend that I knew this off the top of my head. Why isn't it telling me? National Alliance on Mental Illness. I was so close. And then also, if someone is like into watching like testimonial type stuff, because you could like also just look up like my experience with insert particular symptom or particular illness. But you could also look at, there's this really awesome person named Nadine Burke Harris. And like there's this whole TED talk that she does where she talks about something called ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Events. And it can really get into like the origin story of your main character. It talks about physical, it's kind of throwing back to epigenetics a little bit, where it's throwing in there like these are traumatic events that occur over like a long period of time or was really intense in childhood. And if this happened, the higher the number, the higher it has the potential of harming the human body, and just like how that affects the body itself. And so that might be something to look into. Just make sure if you're looking at that or listening to that TED talk that you like take care of yourself, because sometimes when people watch that TED talk or take the ACE score, they realize that they've, been through some big T trauma situations that they may not have labeled it trauma until that point. So that's another one to look at. Of course, also the DSM-5 and the ICD-10. I mean, they're really expensive books, so like you don't have to buy them. But like if you're looking at research for your particular disorder, then you can look up what does the DSM-5 say about this, or what does the ICD-10 say about this.
Amazing. That is a boatload of resources. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. Yay. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Oh my. Okay. So this one's dumb, but when so in my particular state in the US, you can have a job at 14 and a half years old. And so I really wanted this particular car. It was a red Jeep Wrangler. And I really, really wanted it. And I knew that the only way I could get it was if I bought it myself. And so I forged my mom's signature on a pass to be able to work. And I got my guidance counselor at school to sign the signature on a pass and be able to work. And I got a ride to apply at a nursing home as a dietary aide, which is just such flattering attire, the hairnet and everything. So I got there and I was like, hey, here's my resume. And they were like, we're really hurting for dietary staff. You would be a dishwasher here. This is what you get paid. And honestly, it's like legit minimum wage at the time, but I thought I would be like so wealthy because I was 14 and a half years old and I was like in 8th grade. And so I was like, I want to do it. So I interviewed well and they gave me the job. But in order to work in a nursing home, there is something called a tuberculosis test that you have to get. And it's this whole thing where they look at like a reaction in your skin and whatever. But the point is that it was before my pregnancy. My pregnancy really made me not afraid of needles, but I have always been super afraid of needles. And so they're coming at me with the TB test. And I was like, I know 14-year-old brain logic. I will just hold my breath and then I won't cry in front of my future employers. So I held my breath so long that I passed out. And, and then my mom was on the emergency contact list. So they called her and she was like, where is she? What is going on? What is happening? And so I got completely found out. But I got the job.
Oh
and
my
I
God.
continued working there. And I was able to buy my like super used red Jeep Wrangler from like a private seller that sold it for
Amazing.
super cheap. And I bought it before I even could drive. So
That is spectacular. I
no regret.
absolutely love that story.
Thank you.
That is amazing. I love it so much. Oh my God. And I love that you actually got the car at the end of it as well.
I did. I got it when I was like, by the time I turned 15, but in the US and in my particular state, you can't get your like permit until you're like 15 years old and 9 months or something. So I had this car and I was like, yeah, and couldn't drive it.
We have to be like 17 in the UK before you can drive.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's horrific. Especially if you live like in the middle of nowhere and there's like no shops for like 9 miles in either direction. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your books, and anything else, your services, your sensitivity services, and anything else you would like to add?
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm most active on Instagram, and that's at Iona.Wayland. And I'm trying TikTok. I don't know if I'm doing well. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm on there too. And then I have my website where if you scroll down to the bottom, it shows my interests and like things I know about what I can read for in my rates and how to submit like a potential like ask a query, so to speak, to see if I can schedule you to do a sensitivity reading. And then to get my book, it's available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. And the ebook and paperback are available through Amazon, and the audiobook is available through Audible. And I had a really, really incredible voice actor do the book. And so it's just like, so it was just such a cool experience when I got to hear it through audiobook, because it just felt like I was reading the book from a totally different lens. So I think people should check that out if they're into audiobooks.
I will put all of the links in the show notes. Thank you so much to all of the show's listeners. And of course, a gigantic thank you to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, as well as stacks of bonus goodies, then you can by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You are listening to Iona Wayland, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast.
Next week, I am talking to erotica author Golden Angel. It is an enlightening conversation. I will say this, I learned an awful lot of stuff that I had no idea about. So from one trigger warning to another, we do talk about sort of dark romance, a lot of different kinks get brought up. And yeah, so if that's not your thing, then I just wanted to let you know. If it is your thing, you're going to enjoy this episode.
Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.